Well, good morning, everybody. I got 8:15 on my clock here, so we'll go ahead and get going. I want to start out with saying an exciting topic. That's the first word that comes to mind. Exciting. Might be frightening, might be scary for some of you. To talk about guitar spot and what the future holds here and what our conditions are this year. But a topic that's been front of mind for a lot of people out there the last few years and obviously becoming a larger topic as it spreads kind of further west and more north here this year and as we go into the future here potentially as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jake Andrle. He's our agronomist out of Wisconsin. He's kind of been in the epicenter of it for our trade area, at least here as it's came into our trade area in the first few years. Jake's been able to kind of witness that and be part of that as it's came in here and been really become an expert of it on it. So the voice that you've heard quite often here, Jake Andrle, for some of you, a newer voice that some of you maybe have not heard of as much, Mitch Bass, but a voice that I'm sure that you will hear a lot. Mitch Bass is an up and coming and a rising star in amongst the legend. Has a wealth of knowledge already at a young age and has learned a lot. So Jake and Mitch are going to go ahead and tag team and present today on Tar Spot 101. So please, again, if you have questions, you can raise your hand. There's up on the top of the icon bar. There's a little hand. You can raise that and we can call on you, or you can go to the chat icon to the left of that and chat it in. Otherwise, we will have time for questions at the end. And we do surely encourage questions. Those are the best things to have, a lot of questions. So if you do have questions, feel like something didn't get answered as Jake and Mitch go through this, please, do one of the three there, and we're happy to have conversation and questions here towards the end. So thank you. And Jake, I'm going to turn over to you with that.
Perfect. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so like Steve said, I'm Jake Andrle. I looking to the people on the call. I know most of you, but so I'm an agronomist over here in Western Wisconsin. Been with Legend for going on 11 years now. So kind of, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, I kind of live in the epicenter or cover the epicenter of where tar spot kind of really first hit the upper Midwest here back in 2018, 2019. So we have a lot of experience with it. Seen it, dealt with it, managed through it. Mitchell here lives further south than me. Mitch, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Mitchell Bass, account manager here in southern Wisconsin. And like Jake said, I think in southern Wisconsin, I get to live through tar spot too. I know our first year we had it was 2018, and we had, I think, half our corn laying flat. And it was an eye opener for sure. And as we've went here through years, we've got to see a lot of it and certainly learn more and more of it every year. So.
Yeah, and just one thing as we go through this, like Wrestler said, this is and not that I'm not diving super deep into some of this stuff because I will, but if you guys have any questions, please ask them in the box. Some of this might seem like we're almost trying to scare you with just some of the yield monitor pictures I have on here and this kind of stuff, but it's not meant to do that. It's just really a lot of people, as I get out in the country and talk with dealers and customers, kind of all over. I could be in South Dakota, North Dakota. I could be over in Michigan. Wrestler and I are going over there today, actually. And there's a lot of misconceptions. There are a lot of guys that are kind of blowing it off. And I know Mitch on his own farm has seen it. I've seen it through customer stuff too. This disease isn't something to joke about or just say, well, it's not going to happen, in my backyard, because it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.
Perfect. Let's get started here. So before we dive in to all the ugly of 2025, just take a second to say I got out to South Dakota here 2 weeks ago for our staff kickoff, and certainly a lot of good corn all the way there and back from Wisconsin. This last week I was out in Minnesota a little bit. Got to get out there, see a lot of planes dropping fungicide. Overall, the corn looks very good, but we've certainly went through some stress to get to this point so far. We started off slow. We were cold early on. People got their corn planted. We got it out of the ground. We got to that V2, V3, and it sat still for a couple weeks. I think Jake could second this. I mean, all the phone calls we had of, is our corn going to make it this year? Is it going to grow? It was growing, but we were just a little short on heat and sun. So, of course, we were wet stress. We had many soils that were saturated, which overall was increasing nitrogen loss. Throughout the early summer in June, we had some cold days. And then as we backed into July, we started to see a lot of heat and actually overly hot. And it wasn't that it was just 95 during the day, but we're getting into some very warm night temps. It's not giving the corn a lot of time to take a break and breathe. Coming out of 2024, we had a very high spore load. We'll get into some maps later in this presentation. But tar spot has been growing every year, and with it expanding into new areas, we're continuing to get more and more spores and infected soils. That's setting us up for a very interesting 2025.
So kind of the big thing is we've been sitting here talking tar spot. So what is it? So it's caused by a fungus. It's Phyllochoromatus is the main disease, or the pathogen that causes tar spots. That top right picture is if you haven't seen it or aren't very familiar with it, up close on a leaf, that's what it looks like. Now you could have 1 to 2 specks on a leaf, 3 specks here, there, up through the canopy. In the later stages of the disease, those spores or those fruiting structures, and I'll talk about them here, continue to grow. So the incidence rate on the leaf gets to be more and more and heavier in that canopy as we go. So those little structures essentially are called stromata. So it's essentially a spore structure. So it's just packed full of spores of the tar spot. So where you're going to see it or what causes it to flare up. So 60 to 75 degree weather for and I didn't put this on here, but for the average temperature for a 24-hour period. Doesn't mean the daytime high has to be 60 to 75. Doesn't mean that that we have to have, say, 90 during the day and, 50 at night or anything like that. It's just kind of, you're looking for those days where we get 78 to 80 and we're only, like Mitch said, where we're not taking a break at night. We're staying in that high upper 60s. That's really where things can start. The other big thing, high relative humidity. I know, like Spring Liberty, a lot of people say you call it the 150 value. So you take the daytime temperature and then the humidity level and add 150. I would say the same thing is true, except normally it's high daytime temp and lower humidity. When you start seeing temps at 70, 75 degrees, and then the humidity gets into that 80, 85% range, 90%, where we have those wet leaves continually in that canopy till 10, 11, sometimes noon during the day. That 7+ hours of leaf wetness is really where the problem starts. So it can be spread by rain splash from the old residue. So say if we were corn last year, those spores over winter, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, it can splash up from the ground. It can come in once the fruiting structures release or the stromata open up and release ascospores. Those can travel by wind and they can travel a very, very long way. So just because you didn't have tar spot last year doesn't mean that it can't jump a couple 100 miles. And we'll show some things on a map that kind of explain that. And then the other thing is we don't think about, but, custom combining. Some guys that are running ground 15, 20, 25 miles apart, if you've got it at a farm over here and you run it through a combine and you move north where you don't have it, necessarily it's not infecting that crop that year, obviously, but that the spore load then is essentially there. You're putting a little bit of residue in there. It's kind of like when SCN first came into the upper Midwest, we had little pockets, and now there's an argument that I'd say it's just about everywhere. So the ascospores are released. Takes about 12 to 15 days. So whether they're on the ground or that's on an infected plant, so it takes about 12 to 15 days before they form another black dot, if you will, on that leaf. And the leaf has to stay wet, kind of similar to like white mold in a flower. That flower has to stay wet for 3 to 4 hours. That you have to have that leaf wetness to have that spore continually grow the structure that it needs to develop the spot, essentially. So the thing is, once it's formed, it produces and releases spores rapidly. And that, where I have it said exponential there, that's the scary part with tar spot is you can see it move in. You'll see a couple specks one day, come back the next day, and you start seeing a couple more. You're like, oh, it's not going to get bad. Say you go up to the cabin for a week, you go away, don't look at it for a week and a half, and all of a sudden you come back and it's a train wreck. And it's because once those spores start to, or the spores are released, those stromata, when they're releasing those spores, it takes a very little amount of time for it to get out of hand. So there's a thing out there called the tar spot complex, and this is something I want to cover. This is probably one of the most misconstrued things that I've heard out there, where guys really don't have a lot of information on. So there's a thing called the fisheye halo. So if you look at that picture on the right, kind of looks like a fisheye, right? You got the pupil and then the outside. Back in Mitch was talking in 2018, southern Wisconsin got hit very, very hard by this complex. So it's normally found in Central America, and it's a separate pathogen that actually causes that fisheye halo. It's a separate pathogen, so it's not the same disease. Now, the weird thing is in 2018, we had the complex show up. Visually, the symptoms were there. We saw the fisheye halo, but that actual pathogen wasn't present. And nobody really in the industry that I have heard has a good answer to why it was like that, but it was there. Now, all the tar spot we've walked, last year where I live was probably some of the worst tar spot in the upper Midwest, within 15 minutes of my front door. I can tell you, I walked field upon field upon field and never saw the complex. I haven't seen it show up since 2018. All the yield loss we're getting now is just from the regular tar spot itself. With that being said, the complex, that pathogen, takes 85 to 90 degree heat pretty much year round. It's not something that I think we're going to see, and I could say that now and we find it tomorrow, but it's nothing to be completely alarmed with. So, but when that, don't think that just because we don't have the complex, we won't lose yield. You can lose 75 to 100 bushel if conditions are right without even that complex being present. So this is one thing I really want to touch on here. This is my favorite little picture. It's pretty simple, but so with any disease, we could be talking tar spot, white mold, anything. This is called a pathogen or disease triangle. So if you've got the right host, so if we're planting corn, for instance, this year, you have a cornfield, you have the right environment, we get that average daytime high, the daytime temperature 60 to 75 degrees. We have the pathogen present, say in residue, neighboring fields, whatever, tar spot is going to show up. If those three stars align, you're going to see it. And I'll get into some misconception slide of guys are like, well, I've got hybrid XYZ, I'll never see tar spot or anything. And the one myth I want to debunk right away is there's not a single brand of seed, a single hybrid on the market. As much as I might talk them up sometimes, there isn't a single hybrid that is completely immune to tar spot. Same thing with soybeans and white mold. It's very similar. There is not a single bean in the industry today that is resistant to white mold where you will not see the infection show up. So it's just a matter of how much, the tolerance of the hybrid is. And I'll touch on that here in a little bit. But that's one thing is, so right now, there's a lot of corn acres out there. Like Mitch was saying, we drove to South Dakota. There's bean fields, but there ain't many across Minnesota. The market planted corn is what it looked like to me. We definitely, especially I saw on the Facebook this morning, out towards Brookings had 6-7 inches of rain. Looked like yesterday towards Wilmer, kind of that area got pounded in Minnesota last night. We're breeding the environment, and so all of a sudden we put a pile of wet stress across a lot of our trade area from last night's storm, and it sounds like we're supposed to get a bunch more. You compound that with next week's daytime highs in that 76, 78 range and some really kind of, I would say, lower overnight lows, which is going to be conducive to a lot of heavy dews. We're kind of heading into that range. So bear with me. So I got a map I'm going to pull up here.
So the map that Jake's pulling up is a 2024 kind of playback of the disease, where it started, kind of where it moved through, and it kind of is going to speak good reason into 2025 as we get talking about that. So you take a look at that map in the lower right, if you can read it, shows anything that's that darker yellow is going to be what areas are infected. If it's a lighter yellow, it's probable, so it's probably there, but it may not be confirmed, and then, or the conditions are right, and then you get into the white, it has not yet been infected, or it just hasn't been recorded. And I think there's something to be said too as we play through this. We're at June 1st right now. Just because a county's not yellow doesn't mean there's not a chance that it's there, because these plants can get infected. We wait a little bit sometimes to show signs, and you got to think, even when there is signs, it has to get recorded and put into this map. So it's always key to try to be a week or two ahead when you're looking at these maps. And if any of you want to go look at these maps too in your free time, I know I like to do it at least once a week. You just go on the internet, type in tar spot map, click on the first link. I think it's the Crop Protection Network. I think what pulls this up, and you can see it. You can see all past years, how it moved through, and kind of how it's expanding.
Yeah, so the map we have up here, the one I have pulled up, is last year, so 2024. And this is just, and I would say this map is, in general, I think Mitch would agree, it's usually about 2 weeks behind. Just by the time it gets reported, they get it updated, get it live on the website. Because I can tell you there's counties as in Wisconsin and Minnesota, as we're clicking through this, that were infected well before they showed up on this map. So, but it kind of gives you an idea. So, Mitch, if you want to talk through them, or
yeah. So we'll start here before you push play here, Jake. But we're sitting here at the beginning of June, and you can see kind of this, July. Sorry, southern Midwest is pretty kind of already pretty spread out. A good chunk of central Iowa, Indiana, a few counties in Illinois. But go ahead here and run to the end of the month here, Jake.
So the area to watch, and this is the one that's the most shocking to me, is right here. Obviously, where a lot of us on this call are from. I mean, there's guys outside of it, but watch this area when we get to about September 7th, I think it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit play, and it'll go week by week. So if you guys see back when we get to, so right here, if you remember last week's weather, towards that September 1st, 2nd, I gotta pause my little slideshow here. When we get to about this point in the season, there was tar spot at this point in the game. All these counties in Minnesota, through here, there was tar spot all over, rampant here. It was present here, not too bad. But the thing is that we had a lot of southerly winds. So if you look last fall we kind of baked at the end. We had a lot of humid mornings. We didn't have a lot of moisture, rainfall late last year in most areas, but all of a sudden we had the right conditions and we had those southerly winds. When you watch this pop up, if I click week by week here, and granted, like I said, all of a sudden, it gets into South Dakota here, and that, you get down towards Sioux Falls area, and within 2 weeks, the whole state, the half a state, it's everywhere.
And I think something to notice too when you look at how it expands as you get later in the season, as we get into more adequate or favorable conditions for the disease to become present. Look at how you go from adding one county at a time to you're adding quarters of states, and it's the disease is imploding on itself in a sense if you watch it.
Yeah. So and looking at it too, now in the guys that are in the eastern part of South Dakota there, and even parts of Minnesota, tar spot was definitely around last year, but it really wasn't yield limiting out that way. Now the areas, so if I click back here, and we'll get off this map here soon, but it's kind of one point I want to make. So so Pierce County had it July 28th. So that's why I say it was about 2 weeks behind is the first time I found it. These areas of Wisconsin, these 4 counties right here, there was a lot of corn, and even Goodhue County, Minnesota, there's a lot of corn in that area that should have done 200, 220, 230, some pretty good ground, especially Goodhue County. I had a plot that normally averages 220, 230, 240, depending on the year in Goodhue County, Minnesota, that averaged 120 to 140 last year. Wasn't anything, we were wet early, but we had nitrogen on it. We should have seen pretty decent yields out of it. We were able to pull it around, and tar spot came in that late part of July and absolutely shut most everything down. And that's the thing, is the persistence of, just because it was in that county doesn't mean it's not, as it sits there and it's there. So the earlier we're getting that infection, the more potential damage it has to do for that, especially localized area, if that makes sense. So, do you have anything else on this, Mitch, at all?
Just run the cursor back to July like 22nd before you flip back to the other.
Yeah, here.
page.
Oh, that's August. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Right there.
So yeah, just everyone take a look at that before Jake goes back to our next slide, but just kind of see where we were at last year, and now Jake roll into 25 of where we're at.
Yeah, so if you
today.
guys visually, so the state that I want to really point out here, so if you look at Wisconsin, and granted I'm from Wisconsin, I know a lot of you guys are from Minnesota, South Dakota on here from what I saw. Look at the counties that are infected this year or last year compared to what this year's map. So I'm going to pull up this year's map here. Okay, so now look at the county. So Kewaunee County up here in Wisconsin, that's one that was infected early last year. This year, these counties right here, almost all these counties in Iowa were somewhat similar. So it's kind of shaping up. So this map we pulled on the 23rd. So it's, it's pretty pertinent. I can tell you I saw a tar spot right about there with my own two eyes last week at the tip of my mouse between the Dunn and Chippewa County line. I have not seen any. I live in Pierce County. I have not seen any there yet, but it's coming. I would predict in the next week or two here, we're going to really start getting some calls. So,
yep, and I think if you look to the west too, if you look at Nebraska, Nebraska was pretty well infected last year. But if we look at how there's almost double the counties here in 25 that are infected versus 24 at this point. All that takes is some, southern movement to bring that disease north. When we start talking the Dakotas and southwest Minnesota. All right, so some factors that influence tar spot. So as Jake talked a little bit earlier about some of the ascospores, so 2.5 to 25% of ascospores are considered viable that overwinter in corn residue. So management decisions like corn on corn, fields that were corn last year that were a pretty high infection load are definitely going to be more prone to tar spot this year than versus like a rotated acre. Fields that are stressed, whether it be nutrition, drought, saturation, compaction, are all at higher risk. And there's really not too much we can do to manage the spores. Tillage could potentially temporarily reduce some spore load, but they move around in the soil, they blow, they grow. It's not a fix.
Yeah. So that the field stress, the other thing I remember last year, there wasn't a lot of it, but fields that have corn rootworm pressure where we have feeding, whether it be we skip traits and use just insecticide and we have some blowing through, residual there, or we have trait failure type stuff or extended diapause. I know this year there's a few spots in southern Minnesota. I've heard a little bit in South Dakota, a few in western Wisconsin. There's some cases of extended diapause here and there showing up. Not saying that it's a guarantee that tar spot's going to show up, but anywhere where we're compromising that plant's normal processes of any way you can think is generally, and then the other side too, on the compromising side, we think about GDUs and lack of GDUs. You think back to last June, we were wet, but we also fell behind on the GDU side because every day it rained and was 65 degrees. If you guys remember what June was this year, and depending on what geography you're in, we're still behind here where I live, not by much, but it doesn't take much of a lack of GDUs. That plant gets stressed trying to get to maturity, and it allows that disease to creep in. So, okay, so this is my favorite slide. This is not meant to offend anybody, but this is some things that I hear that I kind of want to just debunk. I'm sure some of you guys might have heard this from neighbors, from customers, and it's just, this is something I want to kind of clear the air and make sure that we get this part answered. So one thing I hear about is we haven't seen tar spot out west. We don't need to worry about it. Last year was a fluke. Last year, there wasn't a lot of yield limiting things. We kind of already covered that. When you look at the spore load that's in Nebraska, and the spores are already present now. So the first year usually you see tar spot typically is never the yield limiting year. It's the next year where everybody tucks it under the rug and forgets about it, and that spore load comes back to remind you that it's still there. So that's a big thing, is once you've got it, you have to essentially make yourself aware to make management decisions if you have to, based on what you're seeing. So I kind of answered the second one. Wasn't yield limiting last year. Won't be this year. That in my local neighborhood where I live, that bit a lot of guys right in the behind. We saw tar spot 2 years ago, even though it was so dry. I had a field literally right around my house that had just a little bit of it here and there. You could find it, but it was nothing to worry about. Guys are like, we're never going to have tar, so that's not going to worry. Those same acres or fields right next to it that went to corn the next year had tar spot July 26th. So you can't just make an assumption based on 1 year. If some of you guys, if you've been around a while, especially in Wisconsin, eastern Minnesota, the northern corn leaf blight outbreak in 2015. Granted, we haven't seen it come back that bad, but that kind of pressure, it's kind of one of those things. 2014, there was a little bit about there. 2015, it became a problem. So this is another big one. Corn prices are down. I'm not spending any more money on this crop. And I completely understand that it's, things are not great out there on the commodity price side right now. I'm going to show you some yield slides from some yield monitors on where fungicides were applied versus not. And of course, Legend Seeds, we do not sell fungicides. I am not paid by any company or anything crazy like that to promote fungicides. I've seen a lot of situations where fungicides really, really do help. Of course, I have opinions on which fungicides work better than others. I'm not going to get into that. But there is, even, when you're looking at it, and the thing is, a fungicide aerial application, just say anywhere from $30 to $50. Pick your poison on what product and whatever. It seems like a lot, but when you're talking, just say for easy math purposes, say $4 corn, it's, 10, 12 bushel. I've got a yield map on here where we had 50 to 60 bushel yield loss, and that's not even an extreme one. So it's not necessarily the cost of, if it doesn't work. If tar spot is the concern and you're going to struggle with it, it can pay big time. So this is another one. I tried a fungicide on my crop last year, didn't see an ROI. Why would I use it now? I kind of just answered that a little bit. And this is another one. And some of the guys and dealers on this call, I saw your names pop up. I know Kevin Carlson's on here from Federated. I farm farther up north. We never see this kind of disease this far north to impact yield. It gets up here late. We just don't have the kind of growing season. And my argument to that is that's what all the guys around my house thought in 2018. Where I live, everybody thought, they heard about tar spot down by where Mitch lives in southern Wisconsin. Oh yeah, that's a big problem down there. We'll see what happens, and 2 years later it was up here, jump 400 miles. So just because you think you live out of the box of this disease, and I'm going to go as bold as to say this disease will hit the Canadian border eventually. Our seasons are changing a little bit. It seems like we're getting these later falls. Now, of course, this year could be completely different. We aren't at fall yet, obviously, but when we start getting those late GDUs late in the season, that's what's allowing this disease to move so far north, is these explosions of spore loads and these big weather fronts we're getting into that late September, early October, these big storm systems that come in, or say if a hurricane comes right up the belt through the central part of the U.S. this fall, that's all it's going to take to travel those spores, because they will travel in the wind. They can get up in the atmosphere and they go. So, and I kind of already covered this last one here. The I plant company XYZ, and they tell me their hybrids are tar spot resistant, so I'm not going to see it in my fields. I call the BS flag on that one. There is germplasm out there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, that is better than others. But like I said, there is no hybrid, no company out there that has a hybrid that is 100% resistant to this disease. It's just back to that pathogen triangle. Okay, so hybrid selection. So I covered a little bit of the top of this. The biggest thing is even the best hybrid tolerant, or the best hybrid that's tolerant to tar spot. So one on the, this is just an example. So 9397 is one of our products on the left. I would call it a 7 out of 10 for tar spot. It's above average control. This had no fungicide on it. Versus a competitor 97 day right next to it, the same day that was September 12th last year. If you look at the ears on the left with how green those husks are and everything, the competitor was not just that much farther ahead from maturity. If you really zoom in, that is all dead leaf material from tar spot. So that's when if you guys are in plots this year, if you come to any plot days, and you hear people talking about tar spot tolerances or this or that. This would be the difference between very good and very bad, kind of just to give you an idea there. So now the biggest other thing, so not only that, if you're trying to manage for tar spot, hybrid selection is kind of the first base level. It's similar like we're dealing with white mold on soybeans, right? You got to have the right variety is the first step. Then you start the fungicides, the tillage practices, all that stuff all comes after that. The other thing you really got to think about too is the relative maturity of hybrids, and this is where I really think doesn't matter if I'm in northern Iowa or if I'm in northern Minnesota. This is going to apply. So when you take a early hybrid moving south, so say I take a 91 day to the Iowa border. Not that I would do that. Now, if it's a poor tar spot hybrid, it's still set up for tar spot, but the thing is that product is going to get to relative maturity a lot faster than, say, 108 day. And I'm using extremes here, but to kind of show the point. So when you cut maturity on the early side, you kind of minimize or reduce, I should say is the right word, your risk of tar spot infection. Now, here's the one that really can get you. Late hybrids moving north, when we really start pushing, say we got an area that 95 days is about the top that we can get to black layer comfortably, and we start pushing 97, 98 day corn, and you have essentially a longer fill window at the end where that corn is waiting, it might have that extra yield punch, but tar spot moves in and it's 2 weeks behind the 91 day. And it's, say quarter milk line, when that tar spot infection gets really bad, it's going to be a bad day on the yield side. You're setting yourself up for having that infection earlier in the crop stage. So, and that's the thing with tar spot, the I guess closer the infection is to that tassel timing, as we're getting mature, I would much rather have tar spot infection come in at 3/4 milk line than blister stage, if you guys get what I'm saying. The earlier you see it, the more time it has to shut down, and the less far along your corn is, if that makes sense. And then fungicides. And if anybody has questions on, we can answer it on specific fungicides and that kind of thing. So the best timing is really between VT, so tasseling to I would say 7 days before tasseling, depending on if you're going to make 1 or 2 fungicide pass. Most of our trade area, we're in the cards for a 1 fungicide pass. Just kind of not a lot of people are set up for 2. There's certain situations and geographies where 2 fungicides does pay. I would say for the most part, a lot of guys in this call, we're looking at that 1 fungicide pass. So VT all the way to R3. The reason I say you get into that milk stage, you can still spray a fungicide. Now, the benefits of the fungicides for some of the like pollination and helping keep the canopy cool, and the other benefits of fungicide, we may be a little late, but if we are specifically targeting tar spot with that fungicide application, the best timing to do it is as long as you can go through the maturity stage without seeing an infection and spraying it. After R3, if you're not seeing an incidence of tar spot, because between R3, R4, and R5 happened fairly quickly, and by that time it's hard because, like I said, it takes 12 to 15 days for those spores to grow another stomata. Then it takes essentially ballpark another week and a half to 2 weeks for it to explode and get out of control. That gets you almost a black layer. And where the economics of it maybe don't make the most sense. But the problem with spraying, say, that 2-leaf, 3-leaf before tassel with the fungicide is we run out of residual at that blister to milk stage. And then all of a sudden, if that disease is around on, say, unsprayed fields, or conditions are right where those spores are released in those same fields right after a residual runs out, you could have spent that $30 to $50 on fungicide, but you're still going to see a 15 to 20 bushel yield loss because that disease is still going to shut you down in the end game. So I'm a big fan of fungicide on tar spot, tasseling and after. The only time I would say it pays to spray well before is if you are planning a 2-pass fungicide, which has kind of a case-by-case basis, or if that's physically, if you don't have your own application rig, and your option is to only spray at that time, then I would say that's better than nothing. Otherwise, a little bit later is better.
I was going to add too, Jake, before we go to the next one, we don't get into brands of fungicide or anything, but definitely something to consider on when purchasing fungicides. If you are pushing towards that VT time or sooner, I definitely encourage talk with your chemical rep or co-op or whoever you work to on that. Ask your legend agronomist. But there's definitely different fungicides in the market that are going to hold on with longer residuals, and that might be a time to put on something that hopefully would have a few more modes of action and hopefully a longer residual out of it than when we get later into like the R3 stage.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yep. So of all fungicides for tar spot on the market today, so pretty much everything that's out there, and there may be something new that's come up that I'm not aware of, but everything on tar spot is preventative only. There is no curative for tar spot on the market. Now there's curatives for other diseases out there, but there is nothing that we can spray today that's going to make those tar spots essentially fall off the leaves and disappear. There's no curative where it's going to clear that up. Like for instance, in soybeans, you can spray out there with like just say like a Trivapro. There's enough propiconazole in that it clears up bacterial wilt where it disappears and it's not a non-issue anymore. That's not the case with tar spot. So once you see it, say if we're out scouting fields and you're looking for it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got tar spot, and you see a few specks here and there, it still does pay to spray a fungicide. The problem is, though, is that infection is still there. Once that residual runs out, it's just going to take off again. So it's kind of putting a band-aid on a gunshot wound, especially if it's a moderate infection where you've got, I would say, you start talking 10, 15, 20 speckles per leaf, or the stromata, if you want to call them that. That's when you start seeing that, you can spray a fungicide, you can stop it for a little bit, but it's still going to overtake that plant, and that's where it's proactiveness with tar spot is the key. So there, like I said, that last bullet point there, if it's there, there's still going to be yield loss. So just the picture on the right here, I actually got this from a good friend. So he lives just east of me, about 15 minutes. And he texted it to me October 5th, and their corn was 16% October 5th, which it should not have been. But he said, can you tell where I sprayed the fungicide and where I didn't? And this is the kind of, when I'm talking, like I was talking before, when I'm talking yield loss with tar spot, you look in areas of the field, I can't see my cursor there, but if you look in that yellow band, there's kind of a big orange L there. If you look at that orange color, we're talking 140 to 160 bushel corn. Right next to it, to the row, we were at 220 bushel corn plus. So there were areas of that field in particular was over a 60 bushel loss. They had other fields that they chose not to spray that they are dearly wishing that they would have last year because they did have pretty decent yield potential. So that's where I'm saying that the guys that don't think fungicides pay, or I'm just going to walk away from this crop, this is kind of if we record this is the slide to show them, because when we're dealing with tar spot, and fungicides in a drought year and some of those things where people don't see a return, when you bring tar spot into that equation, it's a very, very high win rate on the ROI conversation. One other thing I want to talk about, and it's not tar spot, this is just leaf disease related. So I've been doing a lot of tassel timing notes. Wrestler and I are going to go look at 2 plots here today on our way across to Michigan. One thing that I'm seeing, and I'm not sounding the alarm, or this isn't anything, get the ground rigs and spray every acre, but I am seeing a lot more northern corn leaf blight than I would like to see, especially for being this early in the season. Typically, from what I can remember in the past, I have not seen bad tar spot when I've seen northern corn leaf blight. Like back in that 2015, tar spot wasn't even around. But the thing that concerns me is if we're already firing up some leaf diseases, and I've seen a little bit of rust, a little bit of eye spot, when we start getting those diseases, tar spot is kind of that one that comes in to crash the tower. It's like when you're a kid and you're building a block tower, and there's that, somebody comes in and knocks the whole thing down. That's tar spot. When you've got that infection and you've got that plant is already, stressed from disease, tar spot's a disease that comes in and shuts the plant down in a week. So, like I said, I'm not here to try to fear monger and get everybody scared by it. It's just something that to get through this disease, being proactive is key. So it's just something that's out there. Maybe that northern corn leaf blight. So I've seen it Northfield, Minnesota, all the way north to Cushing, Wisconsin, my home area where I live, all the way down to Galesville. I'm sure it's going to be, I haven't been down there yet, but northeast Iowa. I haven't been down there in a couple weeks, but that disease is out there, and that's just something to keep an eye on. Maybe that's the, if you start scouting fields and looking, if you're not seeing tar spot, but you're concerned by it, and you start seeing a fair amount of northern corn leaf blight, because that is a northern corn leaf blight can take a pile of yield too in the right scenario. If you do have questions, feel free to contact me. Shoot me a text, call me, email me, whatever. Because it's going to be in the next couple weeks here. You're going to get a lot of questions. I know helicopters have been out. Some areas, Iowa's pretty much all done. But my area, that a lot of it got done last week, and they start south and they move north. So you're going to continually get these questions from customers. And if you need help navigating through that or whatever, either call Mitch or I. We're definitely here for you on that side. So thanks, everybody.